Welcome to another edition of Begley's Mailbag, where we answer your questions about the Knicks and the NBA. We're going to start off here with Dark Steve 590, Steve Thomas, who wants to know, will Quickley be in consideration to be the full-time point guard next year? Now, I think for this to be the case, the Knicks internally would have to change their mind based on how they were thinking at the trade deadline. Because at the trade deadline, Jalen Brunson was, on their radar. And so obviously, Immanuel Quickley's played extremely well since the trade deadline and to the end of the season. I'm sure he's opened up a lot of eyes internally. I don't know whether, he's done enough for them to consider him the full-time starting point guard moving forward and for them to move off the idea of adding a point guard in the offseason. But that would be a shift in thinking from where they were at the break. At least some people with the Knicks internally had Jalen Brunson on the radar. So it'll be interesting to see how things proceed. But at the very least, Quickley has shown the Knicks and the rest of the league what he can do in extended minutes, and particularly initiating an offense. I think he's really grown in that area. Scouts have said it. So that's something to be, I think, optimistic about if you're the Knicks and you're thinking about Quickley's future. Next, we've got one from Mets fan 125, Jake, who asks, how much cap flexibility do the Knicks have in the offseason? They don't have much cap flexibility at all. They don't have cap space over the cap because of the contracts that they signed last offseason, the multi-year deals to Nerlens Noel, Alec Burks, Derrick Rose, and everybody they brought in. So they don't have cap space. They can create cap space by sending out, a contract like an Evan Fournier or one of the players I mentioned earlier to a team that has room to absorb that contract, like in Oklahoma City, and then you don't take back anything. You take back a pick or a player who doesn't have a guaranteed salary. That's a way to create cap space to go after free agents, but it's tricky. So I think that the most logical route, the easiest route for this Knicks team to improve the roster in the offseason, it's not free agency, but it's more so the trade route because of their cap situation and how their money is tied up into a lot of the deals that they inked last offseason. Now we've got another one from the Rules, Derek Sullivan, who wants to know, what are some center options if Mitch ends up signing elsewhere? One thing with Mitch signing elsewhere, I would have to think that the Knicks would aggressively pursue, sign and trade options if Mitch does go somewhere else. You want to get something back if Mitch is leaving. You don't want to lose a player that has spent 4 years in your program, lose him for nothing. So I think you start there with Mitch potentially signing elsewhere, and then potential replacements. I go back to where the Knicks were, at least where some Knicks decision makers were ahead of the deadline. They had their eye on Miles Turner. So I wonder if they go back there on Turner, because where Indiana is, it seems like they're slow playing a rebuild. And because of that, it would seem like Miles Turner wouldn't be in their long-term plans. Maybe they change their thinking there. Maybe they see him as an important presence in their locker room moving forward. But where they were at the deadline before Miles Turner got hurt, they were open to moving. So the Knicks had interest then. I would assume that he's one of the centers that they would have their eye on if Mitchell Robinson left. Obviously Jericho Sims showed New York a lot in the last few weeks of the season. I don't think he showed them enough to pencil him in as the starting center if Mitch leaves. So I would assume that they look at outside options. That also assumes that they trade Nerlens Noel, because Noel obviously was hurt a lot this year, but they feel like he's healthy. Maybe he comes back as a starting center. But as far as outside options, I would look at Turner and then maybe look at other centers who would not break the Knicks bank via trade. DeAndre Ayton, he's going to be a restricted free agent. I would assume that would be too big of a commitment for the Knicks in terms of obtaining him in a sign and trade, but there will be options there. It's going to be interesting to see how they proceed there with Mitchell Robinson and his future. Next, we have a query from Boeing's Bias, who wants to know, with the rise of Immanuel Quickley and Obi Toppin and having not a lot of cap space, would the idea of RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, and Immanuel Quickley be entertained as a big three by the front office? I mean, listen, that's a dream scenario, right? To have three players that you obtained via the draft develop into a big three. Is it realistic at this point? I'm not sure. I do know Scott Perry, Knicks GM, he was in Detroit when Detroit won that title with Chauncey Billups and those guys. And that team, didn't necessarily have a superstar. They had a lot of really strong players. Obviously, Chauncey Billups, fantastic player. Rip Hamilton, fantastic player. But there was no dominant LeBron type player on that roster. and the way it was built was interesting. And I wonder if, because Perry is with the Knicks, do they maybe consider the idea of, hey, let's take it slow. We have these young pieces here. Let's see how they develop. Let's see who we can add around them to complement them, and maybe we can, replicate the kind of success Detroit had when Perry was in Detroit. I don't know if the Knicks would consider that option, but if you're talking about those three young guys being your big three of the future, that to me would have to be the route you go. You would have to slow play it and, see how they develop over time and give them the opportunity to take shots and have the ball in their hands a lot instead of acquiring a star. I have to think Leon Rose and his group is more so focused on luring in some big talent, so the young guys would not be the big three, but it's an interesting theory. We've got one from Jaden. Jaden wonders, is there any interest from the front office in a possible Rudy Gobert trade if he becomes available? Now, you look at Utah, I think, the more likely star to be available and in this kind of trade situation would be Donovan Mitchell. So, if I'm the Knicks, I'm keeping a close eye on that series, Dallas and Utah, and seeing what happens there. Mitchell, throughout the course of the season, publicly, expressed some frustration with just losing and not having the kind of success that I'm sure everybody with the Jazz organization wants. And that's normal, but there's been so many, whispers, reports around the league about Mitchell's frustration overall, and, could an early playoff exit lead to Donovan Mitchell asking for a trade? We're a long way away from that, but if you're looking at that Utah situation, I wouldn't look at Gobert as much as I would be keeping an eye on Donovan Mitchell and how things shake out over the next couple of weeks against the Mavericks, because there's a lot of smoke around there, and usually when there's smoke, there's some fire. So we'll see how it plays out. Got a great one from Rational Yankee fan who wants to know, will the Knicks ever be good again? And, this is probably a common refrain among Knicks fans, particularly ones who've been paying attention to the team over the last 2 decades or so, because you got a little taste of success. Mike Woodson, 2012, 2013, they won 54 games, won a playoff series. By and large, it's been crickets since then, except for last year with Tom Thibodeau, Julius Randle, leading the group to that surprising run. But then here we are a year later, and they've taken a step back. So I can totally understand frustration among Knicks fans and just wondering when this team is going to turn it around, when it is going to create a sustained winner. And this is a big offseason for them, right? Leon Rose, his group, Tom Thibodeau. There's a lot of decisions to make, and these decisions will be pivotal in terms of their ability to build this thing out and build out a sustained winner. Or you could see they don't make the right decisions, things continue to go sideways, and we're back in this Knicks cycle where you're firing the team president, the head coach, decision makers, and you're bringing in other people to try to get it started again. We've seen it so many times over the past 2 decades. The Knicks seem to be caught in that cycle. Is this group, Leon Rose, William Wesley, Brock Aller, Scott Perry, are they the guys to change the cycle? This offseason, I think, is going to tell you a lot about the answer to that question. That's it for this edition of Begley's Mailbag, but please keep those questions coming. We love them, and we'll be back with you guys soon to talk draft and free agency.